Hey, everybody, and welcome to F Your Brewery. No, not that F word. Today, we're going to talk about funding your brewery. I'm excited to be joined by Alison and Betsy of Lady Justice Brewing and Rick from Brewery Finance to learn about the funding process from both sides. And now let's meet our guest. And Rick, because you're wearing a cowboy hat and to the right of me, you get to go first.
Well, fantastic. Thank you very much, Andrew. Yes. Hi, my name is Rick Wayner. I'm the founder of Brewery Finance. We started financing breweries in about 2005. As I say, we were doing it before it was cool. We've got a lot of fundings under our belt, a lot of great customers, and I've had the pleasure of working with Lady Justice most recently. And so, yeah, that's what we're here to talk about.
Cool, Rick. Thanks for being here. Betsy, good to see you. Your turn.
Great. I'm Betsy, co-founder and owner of Lady Justice Brewing. And we recently, March 1st, moved into a new space. We moved into a space that was about 5 times the size of our old space and needed some financing. And after quite the journey to get there, we found Rick, and he was awesome. So it's worked out well so far.
No, I've been so excited to, one, be friends, but follow this journey. It's exciting, and I can't wait to visit the tap room.
Yeah.
Now, Alison, glad you could join us today as well.
Happy to be here. Hello, I'm Alison. I am the Director of Marketing and Sales at Lady Justice. I am Betsy's wife, and joining us on this call is also my cat, Basil, behind us. So welcome, Basil, jumping into a box.
Well, let's get this conversation started. You know, as you two mentioned, you recently moved from your longtime tap room in Aurora to a much bigger spot in Inglewood. Tell us more just about the journey to get there. And Alison, I love your hoodie. Just want to throw that out there as well.
Yeah, our journey to Inglewood.
Yeah, I mean, the reasons. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, we opened. Lady J's been around since 2016 is when we started first selling our first beers, and we were tiny, 1-barrel system out of what I like to say is an abandoned car garage. And then my co-founder Kate likes to remind people that there actually was a viable business inside there that we subleased from. But we were basically in the office of what would be like the size of like a Jiffy Lube waiting room, and we were membership only, production only, because we didn't have room for a tap room. We didn't take on any debt to open. We opened Lady J with $20,000 that we fundraised through an Indiegogo campaign. So we started small, and that's sort of been our path all the way up until about earlier this year, where we were sort of risk averse, took very tiny baby steps in the directions we wanted to go, mostly because it's hard to get funding for projects in beer, especially right now. And we didn't want to take on too much debt, because everywhere we were going, like the path that we were on was good and we were growing, but we were growing very slowly. And we didn't, myself, my co-founders, Kate and Jen, and my wife, Alison, none of us really felt like taking on big chunks of debt to, open a tap room or move into distribution was ever really right for us until we found our own tap room space. We moved a couple of times, shared space with another brewery, and then eventually needed our own tap room. And so we opened up a tap room in Aurora, Colorado, on East Colfax, which is a really fun place to people watch. But it's a really great little vibrant, very urban setting of a neighborhood that has just so many great food, restaurants, activities, everything. But we grew out of that space pretty quickly. Our back of house became full of beer pretty quick, and we were in there for about 3 years, and then desperately was running out of room. So
What year did you move into the space?
We moved into the space in 2020. I signed the lease March 15th, 2020, and the state of Colorado shut down on March 18th, 2020. So, I didn't know at the time, but I was very glad I didn't have a bank loan in that situation. I was able to loan money from a friend of mine, to get the tap room going. So I was pretty lucky in that regard that we didn't take on a whole bunch of debt, only to open to, the worst global pandemic the world has ever seen. And so we got through it and we grew, but that made us go into distribution, just like a lot of folks did. We went into distribution 2 years earlier than we thought we would because of COVID. And so we ran out of space very quickly. And so we started searching around for possible new locations and tried to think about what that could look like. Do we want to buy a building? Is there a turnkey situation that we can just move into, which is what we had done on the Colfax space? And so eventually we were connected with a brewery here at Englewood that was needing to close down for some family reasons. They were having to move out of state. And they contacted us because they knew we were looking, and we started to get the ball rolling on lending, and that was a journey that we could talk about later in this.
Yeah, let's pause it here for a sec. I think you kind of gave a lot of the story of Lady J and how you got to where you are. Now I'd love to take it to Rick from the finance perspective. Let's kind of set the table a little bit. Rick, you're a finance expert, but many people are not. Many of us are just in the beer industry because we really like beer and we like how it brings people together. So I would love for you to kind of take a moment, kind of explain a little bit more about what Brewery Finance does. And I know you provide both working capital and equipment financing, but what's the difference between both? And like what other terminology should brewers be familiar with in just regard to raising money?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, we are primarily an equipment finance company. We are not a bank. We're independently owned. I'm currently sitting in my kitchen where the neighbors decided to start mowing his lawn in the middle of our podcast.
Always. I can't hear
it. Good. We do like I said, equipment financing, and like you said, working capital. The difference is, obviously working capital is for operating your brewery, or we could use it for paying taxes that you didn't anticipate having, or you have an opportunity to get a good deal on a big old load of cans or something like that, and you just need the capital up front to make the purchase. So working capital can be used for just about anything. I typically do not provide working capital for somebody to purchase equipment, and that is because our working capital loans are generally shorter term, maybe 12 to 15 months. They can have a weekly pay or versus like a monthly pay. They're really for a short-term need. Equipment financing, we can break out over more like 4 or 5 years, and finance predominantly just equipment, canning lines, fermenters, kegs, any kind of tangible business asset. Typically, I mean, sometimes we can't do like hoods or something like that for restaurants because they become part of the real estate. But so that's the difference between the two. We do mostly equipment finance, some working capital. In terms of terminology, I would say when it comes to, we're a leasing company or a lease and finance company. We're not a bank. When you're working with a bank, you're going to have to come up with a bunch of more. Typically, you're going to have to come up with much more information than we would typically ask for. Tax returns, personal financial statements, business plans, all that kind of thing. We have this is the term that I like to throw around the most, is just application only financing. It's kind of like I was going to say, don't ask, don't tell. It's like we don't want to know. We don't want to dig real deep into financials. At least not typically. I take that back. We're happy to do it. We don't need to do it. We have application only financing. We use the equipment that we're financing is our asset. So we don't put a second mortgage on a lien on your house. We don't do a blanket lien on the business, nothing like that. And because of that, we have probably a little bit more expensive rates than you would get through a bank, but it's quicker. And our credit window is this as opposed to this. So application only versus full disclosure financing. We're an application only lender. We can do full disclosure where we need all the tax returns and all that business, but we don't typically go down that road. In terms of my world, leasing versus finance, this is some terminology that I end up explaining a lot. There is such a thing as a true lease. Not many people use them anymore, but it's where you can basically essentially rent the equipment. You go out to the vendor or to the market where you're finding used equipment, and you want to finance that, or you just want to make payments on it. And so we can get that financed through a lease. At the end of the term, say it's 5 years, you have the option of returning the equipment to us, continuing to make payments on it, just kind of renting it forever, or you can purchase it for fair market value. Not many people do that anymore, but there are some financial benefits to doing so based on if you need write-offs for your business and that kind of thing. With a true lease, you write off 100% of the payment every month. With an equipment finance agreement or a lease with a $1 buyout, you are going to own the equipment at the end of the term, so you don't get to take that write-off every month, but you get to depreciate the asset. So I'd say probably 90% of what we do, if not more, are equipment finance agreements or leases with $1 buyouts where the customer owns the equipment at the end of the term.
Awesome. Thanks, Rick.
Oh, yeah, you bet. No, that's good. I'm running out of terminology.
Well, I was going to say, Alison and Betsy, you've been going through this process between looking for a new location, trying to find financing, meeting Rick. Along the way, are there any terms that you learned that Rick hasn't mentioned that were kind of beneficial to understanding what was going on?
I mean, I didn't even know this was a possibility until I found Rick, to be quite honest. Like, I didn't know that there were options for lending that was based just on the value of the equipment and how much that was worth, because what we were doing was looking at SBA options or putting together some smaller loans from the credit union we use or stuff like that. And all along, when you go the traditional bank route, it is like we own a house, and it's like, are we having to put this house up for collateral? And we believe in Lady Justice, and we think it's going to be successful, and everything points in that direction. But also, I love Lady Justice. I don't want it to make me homeless, So there's risks and all of that, and then being women, being part of the LGBTQIA community, we are statistically lended to less than other populations, and so it was just hard to find banks that could that wanted to be into what we were doing, even though we have a high home value and we have high credit scores. It was a tough lending season at the end of the year last year, and so I was just thrilled to learn that Rick existed and this was a possibility, because something I kept bumping my head against was, we're about to move into a space full of great equipment, right? And that's worth something. And why can't the SBA, why can't the banks understand that the equipment that we have in our back of house is actually worth a ton of money? It's most of what we're buying here. So I was just, I had no idea this was even a possibility until I ran across Rick's website, I think. So
thank you for SEO.
Yeah, thank you. This is my favorite topic, is SEO, but I guess I'll talk about brewery finance. I think that is the most important. I think there are folks out there who might be a little bit like me. My favorite sentence that I've been jokingly saying is anyone can own a brewery. And then I say look at how bad I am at filling this growler. It's a funny joke, but the concept of when it comes down to your idea and it's time for you to start or grow, and you think to yourself, how often and how many times do I have to explain why this is going to work, why this is a good business plan over and over? We didn't have to do that in this situation, because it felt like the first version in discussing financing where somebody heard what we were saying of, these things have value, here's our plan, what do you think? And we were met with yes. It's been, I'm sure there are other folks Betsy had mentioned, right? Being women and being in the queer community, it's been very difficult to figure out financing. We'll get further into a process and then have people say, never mind, or we don't even get to start the conversation. That just simply wasn't the case here. And I think that if you're looking at the traditional ways of getting funding and financing, I think that you can feel pretty stuck pretty quickly. And so going through and having the discussions of, oh no, this is an option. Did you know you could do X, Y, and Z? It doesn't always have to be A, B, and C, was really helpful.
No, good insight from both of you. Now, Rick, they alluded to the challenges that breweries have these days when trying to find funding. And I've heard that some banks don't want to get involved with brewery projects anymore. What's the current market like?
Yeah. It is a challenge right now, and I would say from a banking perspective, it's been a challenge for a long time. When I first started Brewery Finance, one of the reasons I thought I would do it is because there was no one doing this. Of course, then the water got warm and breweries were killing it everywhere they went, it seemed like, and I got a lot of competition, which is great. It validated my idea, right? Because better to be lucky than good sometimes. So. So things were pretty good for a while. Lots of SBA lenders were jumping in. Even neighborhood banks were jumping in. People were starting. The more they got educated on the beer industry, just because they live in a community where there's starting to be breweries, the easier it was to get funding. But right now it's a challenge. We always are reading about breweries that are closing or switching hands, and sometimes it's not because the market's not working. As Betsy mentioned, the brewery space that they're in now is because somebody had a family issue they needed to deal with out of state. But there are a lot of breweries closing, and the numbers, when you start digging into the financials, aren't as good as they used to be in a lot of cases. It doesn't mean they're bad businesses, and it doesn't mean they're going to close. It just means, they've got, you got to keep grinding things out. And so a lot of the SBA lenders that we had not really competed with, we're actually very friendly with, we share leads back and forth quite a bit, have told me we're just not, especially startups, we're just not working with startups anymore. They've told me that for existing breweries, they really have to be strong. And so that hasn't been the case with Brewery Finance. We still work with startups. We still work with people with challenged credit. It doesn't mean we can get everything done, but you've got somebody here that makes his entire living doing this. And so I'm highly motivated to continue doing it. My name of my company is Brewery Finance. It's not generic finance. So I'm kind of tied into this right now, and happily so. So yeah, it's a challenge, but it doesn't mean all hope is lost. And like, Betsy had mentioned, Betsy and Alison have great credit, value in their home. But what Betsy didn't mention is that they've got a long track record too. That to me, that stands for something. I've known peripherally the story of Lady J from the beginning, or certainly darn near the beginning. And I know that these two have gone from place to place, and just, it's like, this, I don't mean this in the bad way, but you guys are like a cockroach, right? Like you're just going to keep on going. You're just going to,
I didn't expect the word cockroach to come up in today's conversation.
Awesome.
There's got to be a better way to describe that than that.
Well, and I think that's funny, Rick, because some of what we heard too was we were talking to these banks in Florida and Utah, places that didn't know who we were, and they're like, okay, well, you seem successful and you have 5-star Google reviews, and you've got good distribution. Why aren't your financials why didn't you make more money last year? And I was like, because our tap room is 45 people. And they're like, and I was like, oh my God, you don't get it. You can only fit so many butts and seats so many times in a day. And so it was nice to not have to explain to you how beer works.
Well, yes, yeah. And that's one of the benefits. I do understand the industry. You don't have to explain to me why an additional fermenter makes sense, whereas a bank you might have to. And I do have that space you guys were in on Colfax. Just a little side story. I financed the first brewery that was in that space, and then I financed the next brewery that was in that space. And now I help you guys as you leave in that space.
You've sold and resold that equipment a few times. That's pretty good.
My daughter's college tuition thanks you all. Yeah.
So one part of this story, I could be making this up, but I'm pretty sure one of you told me this, is you all first connected when Rick was at a rodeo one night that within a few hours, magic happened. Is that a true memory I have, or am I making that up?
The rodeo was in town when I called him.
That's right. It was, that must have been in January, right? Is that, yeah. We didn't meet at the rodeo, but that's when Betsy reached out. It was the National Western Stock Show was in town.
So Betsy and Alison, when you realized you needed a bigger space and this brewery reached out to you about this turnkey opportunity, how did you figure out and learn or discover how much money you needed to make it happen?
We might have two very, like, it's the same story, but we might have two different thoughts on it.
Go for it, Al.
So we had known maybe 2 years in at Colfax, like, we're going to need a bigger space. And it's because we utilized our time during COVID to focus on distribution, and that worked in our favor. And so we learned very quickly that on top of needing butts and seats, and for me on the marketing side of things, like having to turn down wedding requests and big party requests and nonprofits hosting their parties with us, like the things that we wanted to do were not possible there. And so that was reason number one, but we were still in pandemic times. And so we were like, that's a future thinking thing. We know people are going to want it, but distribution is the thing that really caught us off guard. And that grew very quickly for us because we have a great product and a kick-ass team. That's just the reality of what that looks like for us. And so in shopping for new spaces, everything that we looked at, we would have folks reach out to us and say, hey, we have this awesome opportunity. Look at this building. It's a cool old barn. It's an empty warehouse. Don't you love this? We would come in, we would look, we could dream. And then they would say, okay, so it'll be $2 million for you to start the build out process. And immediately Betsy and I were like, bye. Like, that is unrealistic to who we are. It's unrealistic to what we can finance. We're not willing to put up every single thing we own just to make that happen. And we're famous for giving away our money to nonprofits. No bank in their right mind is going to be like, yeah, let's throw $2 million at them. They definitely won't give that away. We would, right? So that was kind of like, that kept being a wall we hit. And we're in the greater Denver area. It's very expensive to be here. And that kind of began the conversations for us. And I think, Betsy, you can talk about when it worked out with the space that we moved into and how we made that happen. But initially, we attempted to go the traditional route, and it did not work in our favor. I'm so grateful for Rick because then it did work in our favor and it worked pretty quickly. But prior to that, it was very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, we were looking at, like, do we try to buy a building? Because there was stuff going up in our neighborhood where there's a little bit of a brewery desert, and tons of space for new development going on over there all the time. And so it's like, is this the moment when we just try to like own a thing so we like don't have to worry about it? And then it was like, we could buy a building and we could do a build out, but we couldn't do both, I think, is what we probably could have ended up affording. And so then it's like, well, I'm not going to like buy an empty building and just like, I don't know, roller skate in it or whatever, and so really turnkey is such a great, if you can find the right location, turnkey can be a really great opportunity to go into a space that might already be established, that has the equipment that you need. And so for us, looking at that, I mean, we're looking at, $300,000 to $400,000 rather than $2 to $3 to $5 million or whatever it's going to end up being to build out our own space. And so really it was just about like, okay, we have stuff in here that already has assets. It's a fairly new, the brewery is built in 2022. So this equipment is still worth a pretty good amount of money. It hasn't failed. It's not, it's not 25 years old. It's doing great. It's pretty new. The previous brewery had all of the receipts. They were really organized. They were able to get Rick what they needed. And so it was just looking at like, okay, I think we actually can be successful in this place. Like, this brewery isn't closing because they didn't have people coming in the door, and there's parking and there's food nearby. So like just looking at what it would take, I'm like, $300,000 is a lot more doable than $1 million, right? And I didn't have to put my house up as collateral to make it happen. So for us, it just felt safer. As Lady J is typically baby steps, risk averse place. It felt like a big jump to us, but it felt like something very doable. And because we had done it on a smaller scale, moving into Colfax as a turnkey, I think we just felt a little bit better about making that decision rather than going to a bank and trying to get a loan for a lot more for a building or for something like that.
So when you all got connected, and Rick specifically, when a business comes to you, what should they have in order when they reach out? And then follow up, like, when do you see breweries typically reach out and say, hey, can you help?
Sure. Typically, like like it did when Betsy and I got in touch with each other. We just had a quick phone call conversation. Betsy laid out everything, and I think all I needed to really ask for initially was an application and last 3 bank statements. And then because they were purchasing used equipment, we had to evaluate the assets and whatnot. If it was coming from a vendor, we wouldn't have to do that. So that added a little bit of time and whatnot, and a lot kind of some additional work for all parties. But it was initially upfront. What I really am looking for is, what's your timeline, and is that doable? And I don't remember, but we did this pretty quickly. It was but from our first conversation to funding wasn't more than a couple of weeks. I don't think.
Yeah, I called you in January, and the rodeo's in town like mid-January, right? And then we had you had the funding all lined up and ready to go by mid-February, and we were in the space March 1.
That's right. Yeah, it was a pretty fast track. So what I'm looking for is, how quickly do you need to move? How much money do you need to, or how much equipment are you looking to finance, or how much working capital do you need? And then it's just a matter of getting an application in. Like I kind of talked about in the beginning, if this was a $500,000 request, we would have had to dig into financials a little bit more, or I would have taken the deal and broken it up into 3 or 4 separate fundings where they could all fit under an application only kind of transaction. But it's how quick do you need to move? How much do you need? We'll have a discussion about credit. Is your credit good, bad? Usually it's amazing how many people tell me that their credit is really good when it isn't. I just want people to be honest with me, because then I can know what I'm dealing with up front, and it's not a surprise. And it also helps me talk much more about what the payment might look like before we even pull credit, if I just know what I'm dealing with. That's about it. It's really for me. It's after we have that conversation, it's on the customer to fill out the application and get it to me. Once I have that, I can move pretty quickly. I'll pull credit. I'll evaluate the deal. I'll ask any questions I need to, anything that pops up when I'm doing kind of my due diligence. And then once I have the answers, I submit for approval. And that whole process, if we're all kind of in lockstep, can be anywhere from a couple hours to a day and a half or something like that to get an approval. Sometimes you got to dig a little bit deeper and work a little bit harder to find the money. But that's my job. So.
No, Alison and Betsy, even before you met Rick, you had been interacting with banks. What are some of the documents and numbers you had to get in order to make this process go smooth? Did you have to redo your business plan? What kind of financials did you have to have in your little folder? How did you prepare on the paperwork side of things?
Yeah, the paperwork's a lot, especially if you're going the traditional route. Rick was far less paperwork than the SBA process. Obviously, it's just 2 totally different paths of funding. So it's they'll want 3 months of your business checking account. They'll want a year of the last year of your P&L. They want your income and expenses over the last year. They want to know what other debts you have. Have you been did you lend from somebody else? Do you owe somebody else a bunch of money? They'll run a lien check on you to make sure that there aren't companies out there holding liens against you. And also, so you have that. You have all of the bank stuff, all the stuff that's fairly easy to pull up. But then the trickier part is I would recommend that anybody sit down and have a business plan before you start asking for money, because you have to be able to tell the story of your brewery in terms of funding, but you still have to tell the story. It has to be a good story. And you have to be able to pretty confidently show them where the successes are going to be and where the failures might be. Because they're going to ask a lot of questions and they're going to wonder about a lot of stuff. And if the numbers on the page don't answer every question for them, like if you go to a bank and you're like, hey, we've been in the black, $500K for the last 5 years. I guess if I were a banker, I'd be like, why are you talking to me? But the people who need to lend money are the people who don't have loads of cash sitting in front of them to spend. And so you are going to have to explain, like, all right, it looks like, you're pretty successful in what you're doing, but like, why didn't you have more people in the tap room? Like, how do you expect to get your tap room income up at this new space? And then it's being able to explain, like, size is everything. We're able to fit more people in. We could do more events. So a lot of it is just have the data there, have a good P&L and a balance sheet that actually balances and all of that stuff. Be able to pull up your checking and credit card statements to show them your Schedule C's if you own the LLC. Like, be able to pull up all of that. They're going to want your tax returns for the last 3 years, everything like that. So it's just a lot of gathering. But I'll tell you, we were doing this at the same time that we were doing the women-owned business certification, and so like I just have a folder that's just like all the shit that everybody wants all the time. It's just in there now. And so after a while, I was like, oh, I already have this. This is pretty easy. But the main thing that'll make your life a lot easier is have a business plan and, write one. And if you don't know how, I recommend using Live Plan as a great way for people who've never done it before. It'll walk you through everything, and it'll do forecasts and P&Ls and all sorts of stuff for you in a way that's a little more, it's manageable. So you can sit down for an hour a day and work through the Live Plan and have a really good business plan by the end of it.
And Alison and Betsy, you both are very, very busy people. You've talked about some of the things that have kept you busy through this process, but there's a lot more even. And, one of the things we've talked about a lot today is the funding side of things. But you took over an existing brewery. So I imagine there was lots of conversation on that side to even get to the point you could approach someone like Rick.
Yeah, we had to have a lot of conversation with the brewery that was in here before, and really like sharing. We did have to share financial info with each other and sort of trust each other that like they weren't bullshitting us, right? Like the numbers that they were giving us were true, and like so there is sort of like a gut check that you have to do, and like, does this feel good? We visited this brewery a number of times, and we had friends visit this brewery without us a number of times before we decided like, yeah, it actually, like, people do come here, and this is a neighborhood that still wants a brewery here, and like, yeah, there is plenty of park, like, so yeah, you kind of have to scope it out, and it's hard sometimes if there's a turnkey brewery that's perfect for you, but the people selling it aren't perfect for you. That can be difficult, and that can be hard. So there is a level of at least professionalism and trust that the people who are selling this to you are giving you good, honest answers and are willing to share their financials also with the bank if needed. Like when you're moving into a turnkey space, like the SBA really wanted to know the numbers of this place. So the owners of the brewery before us really had to be willing to show, their P&L to a random bank that they really had nothing to do with at the end of the day, but they wanted us to be in this space, so they worked with us.
So you've been in the brewery a little bit of time now. How's that been? I want to hear all the good things that you love.
Okay, I can speak to this. I think the plus of this space is that it answered a lot of the questions that people had for us prior, if that makes sense. So for us to make this move, we knew we needed more space because distribution helped us grow. But for me and our team on the receiving end of requests, it was, can I have my party there? Can I do X, Y, or Z? Can you please book a food truck? And these were all options that were not possible based on our former location, which had no parking lot and a 45-person capacity space. It was very helpful to know that we needed to move beyond the distribution piece. We knew that years prior, but at the time it was during the pandemic and we didn't have to think, well, we need more people in the space because that just wasn't a realistic need. It became a realistic need when we were asked repeatedly the same types of questions. And so that helped Betsy and I kind of create, similar to if your brewery has a mission statement or something and it helps you stay aligned. It helped us stay aligned when we were looking for new spaces. Hey, we know it needs parking. Hey, we know we need a spot for, love that. We need a spot for a food truck. We know we need a spot for live events. We know we want this to be ADA accessible. What are the pieces of things that people have brought to us that we want to ensure in the next space? That made the movement into that spot a lot easier. The other piece that I think is really important, and I think is something we don't talk enough about in craft beer as a whole, is the physical location of the space. And for us, we were on a very busy street in a spot that was difficult to find street parking. And that really does make a difference. We had folks who said, hey, I tried to come by and I drove around the block 4 times and I gave up. We had food trucks who did the same thing. And they said, I can't come to your business and park, so there's no food truck today. That got really, really hard. So a big piece for us when Betsy and I first went to go look at our spot was like, look at all this parking. Even if you can't make it in the lot, you can just park on the street. Like, this is wild. And it's true for us and for our crowd and for what they want. You know, ask your people, what do you want to see? If we moved into a new spot, what would you want to see from us? Don't be afraid to ask those questions, because for our people, it's like, oh, I just want a parking lot to be able to eat food and stay and hang out for a bit. Can I bring my dog? Which is like very Colorado. All of that was a possibility in this new space. And therefore, it has been like, the space is 5 times the size, and it has been a billion times better for us. We had one of our longtime members of our beer club say to us, hey, just so you know, this is always exactly where you were supposed to be, as they casually walked out. And I was like, oh my God. And like, but it's truly that. So know what you're looking for. It's almost like when you're buying a house and you're like, I know I need 2 bathrooms. Whatever those things are that you think you need, think about it on behalf of your patrons. What do they want? What do you hear them asking for? It will help you narrow things down. For us, the reality of our patrons want us to build them a brand new space, and for it to take 4 years and for us to finance millions of dollars behind it was not actually what they wanted. That was where our head was going, because that's a very Denver move, but that wasn't our reality. So it was patience, a lot of waiting, a lot of shopping for it to work out for us in this way.
And I love how you all answered all those questions you touched on just now, because your prior customers from the old location had a lot of questions. Like, you know, how will you retain the same vibe they know and love at the new space? And looking at the mural behind Betsy right now, it looks like you did a pretty good job.
We did. We brought in our same artists. That piece was super important for us. And one of the top questions that were asked by people is like, did your regulars come with you? We are very much clear on the other side of town. It is a very opposite space, and our regulars still come. They're there every Wednesday for trivia. We love that. It's a lot of the same folks who say, yeah, I'm willing to make the trip because I love this space enough to come there and, you know, continue to make that my community and to grow it. And look, I can bring all my friends and they can bring their dogs, right? Fantastic. Please do.
I know. I absolutely can't come. I can't wait to come visit.
Yeah.
I'm looking at flights, finding some affordable ones before too long, friends. It's going to be good.
Yeah.
So as we wind down this conversation, we've talked a lot about the process, but Rick, is there anything we didn't touch on today that's important for people to know?
No, I don't think so. I think we hit it pretty well. I think the most important thing for people to know right now is don't get discouraged. There's you got to keep digging sometimes, and but there are ways to fund a brewery. One thing I've always said, for 20 years, the most creative business owners I've ever worked around are brewery owners. They don't take no for an answer, and they figure out a way to get things done. And what I love about working with breweries is that you're really talking about somebody's dream. You know, and being able to help with something like that is a real special feeling. So,
and Rick, if anybody's interested in picking your brain on the way to the rodeo, how can they get a hold of you?
Appreciate that. I just thought about this the other day. I'll tell you how to get a hold of me, but I was doing
show up at the rodeo so they can see you face to face.
That's right. I'll be the guy in the beer line probably. Years ago, I did a radio interview with American Craft Beer Radio. And in the middle of the interview, or at the end of the interview, the host asked me for my contact information for anyone out there who might be listening, and I went completely blank. Didn't remember my phone number, my email, my web address, nothing. So I was prepared this time. So yeah, anyone can call me. My business number is 303-800-1063. Website is breweryfinance.com.
Easy to remember. Well, thanks, Rick. Now, I've got one final question for you all. You know, you all, Rick, you've been doing this for years. Alison and Betsy, this has been a journey for you. What song would you use to describe the process you've gone through?
I'm ready. Running Down a Dream by Tom Petty, for sure.
I love
like that song is about like, don't give up and like fight through the mundane, right? And I feel like, right, this is our 8th year of serving beer and our 10th year of business. And it literally just now feels like a massive success. So patience pays off. And like keep following the plan that you know that you have. If you have a strong and good business plan, you can enact it, right? So at least we got to believe that. Otherwise, we're all going to go nuts.
And I love how quickly you unmuted to make sure no one else had that answer.
Yeah.
Before you
Don't take my song, you guys.
Good call on Tom Petty.
Who's gonna answer with that?
Me! Come on,
like,
that's...
2 people aren't gonna answer with that one. Oh man, I keep trying to figure out which Dolly Parton song matches, and I don't know. I mean, working 9 to 5 is not correct. It's more like working like 7 to 9. If we could change the word, it's a hustle. It really does take a ton of work on top of running the business that you're running. To be able to go out and find money for it and not curl up into a ball every night is hard, because you're gonna get no's and you're gonna get skepticism, because at least in Denver, like it feels like everybody owns a brewery, so why are we special, And so having to keep trying to convince people that what we're doing is meaningful, it's a grind. So yeah, I'll stick with 9 to 5, but I would kindly ask Dolly to change the time.
No, I love it. That's about the answer I would expect from you, Betsy. No, Rick, you've got pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. I cannot. So my first response was going to be
Tom Petty.
I can't think of anything that appropriately describes the search for money. I was going to say "Mama Tried" by Merle Haggard.
Big fan of Merle.
But I love Merle Haggard too. But when Betsy mentioned Dolly Parton, the first song that came to my mind was Mule Skinner Blues.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm a lady mule skinner, and I can do it just as good as anyone else. So.
Hell yeah.
I love it. This has been an awesome conversation. Alison and Betsy, you're great people. You have such, mission behind what you do. I'm so excited to see your success. Rick, so glad to see you all connected. And thank you all for joining for this wonderful conversation today. And I am looking forward to pints in your tap room, all of us together before too long. Rick, I'll let you know when I'm coming.
I look forward to it very much.
See everybody soon.